This is the schedule that Florida State should have played last year. Mark Rogers TV, we continue our series. We're looking at every Power 5 conference schedule in America. We've wiped out the Big Ten and the SEC. We make our way to the defending national champion, the Florida State Seminoles, the winners of the final BCS Championship. They were not challenged the entire season. Clemson, they wiped them out. Miami, they wiped them out when they were undefeated. Their toughest challenge was actually a game against Boston College. The Eagles led at the scrappy Eagles 17-0 before Florida State put it on BC 48-34. That was their closest game by 14 points. Even in the ACC Championship game, they demolished Duke 43-7 before the BCS Championship game, and then they took on the SEC winner, and that was a great, all-time great matchup. Auburn almost pulled it off, but Florida State completed the undefeated campaign 14-0. I was critical of the Florida State schedule the entire season. Mostly not their fault, but they didn't play anybody non-conference. Nobody. Of course, they've got the rivalry against Florida. Typically, that's a top matchup, but the Gators were 4-8. That was unfortunate that we didn't see the Gators of 2012, an 11-win football team with possibly the best defense in the country, take on Florida State. But it was just disappointing that I didn't really watch much Florida State football the entire season, because why? They were always up 28-0, 35-0 in the first quarter. It wasn't a game. There were better games to watch. I tried to watch the ACC championship game, but again, better championship games to watch. This Florida State team was dominant, to their credit. But again, who did they really beat? They beat Clemson. Clemson was legitimately a top 10 team when you think back and see that Clemson defeated one of the 10 best teams in the country, Ohio State, barely in the Orange Bowl, and barely got by Georgia. Again, when they were fully staffed, fully manned, fully healthy, that Georgia team was serious. So Clemson was legit. Florida State annihilated Clemson, to their credit. But I would have loved to have seen Florida State get pushed by a couple elite teams, a couple more elite teams. The Clemson team, again, legit. That was a great win, and then they got pushed by Auburn. But 2 out of 14 games, it would have been nice to have seen a stronger ACC present a little bit more of a challenge. Had Florida State played in the SEC or any other league, Pac-12 against Oregon, Stanford, UCLA, wow. That would have been nice to see. Credit Florida State with this schedule. I thought I was looking at a weak schedule, then I picked it up and I really looked through it. Yeah, that first game against Oklahoma State's probably not going to be the matchup that we could have seen last year. I would have expected Florida State to have beaten Oklahoma State last season by a couple touchdowns, but the Cowboys had one of the 10 or 15 best teams in the country. They were legit as well, losing 2 games before falling to a very good Missouri team in the Cotton Bowl in a very, very close football game. So Oklahoma State, Florida State last year, but this year the Cowboys probably not quite as good. Lose the quarterback, lose most of the defense, and lose their All-America cornerback, of course. So Oklahoma State, Florida State, yeah, it's a big-time opponent. But again, Florida State misses a quality Cowboys team, a team that's probably going to go about 8-4 this season. Okay, there are other non-conference games for Florida State. The Citadel, okay, mark that one off. That's the one completely ridiculous, easy one, like everybody has. Should only have one. Florida State, to their credit, only has the one. Their other non-conference games are against Notre Dame, so I like that matchup. Florida State still probably too much for Notre Dame, but this is a game that America is going to want to see, and this is another bonus for the ACC to have to play Notre Dame, and this is legitimately a top 25 team at Notre Dame. So the Irish taking on Florida State on October 18th, and then, of course, the other non-conference matchup against Florida. So hopefully the Gators bounce back and present a challenge in Tallahassee, the final game of the regular season, because 37-7 against a Gator team that was just crippled with injuries and in complete disarray at that point, losing 7 consecutive football games. So Florida State, if you look at the totality of this non-conference slate, I'm telling you, it's probably the best non-conference schedule in the country. I didn't think I was going to say that, but basically most of the big teams around America play one other big team. Probably. Some of them don't. Alabama don't play anybody. Florida State, Oklahoma State, again, they're probably going to be about the 30th best team in the country. Good, solid, sound football team. Would have loved to have seen the matchup last season. Again, Notre Dame and Florida. Would love to see Notre Dame and Florida at full strength. Probably not going to get it this season, but there's still two very strong football teams that Florida State is going to have to match up against out of conference. Bring in Louisville minus Teddy Bridgewater. Again, a game that would have been great to see last year, but Louisville comes in. That's a game that Florida State plays at Louisville on October 30th. So here's the conference schedule. It starts off with Clemson, so another matchup with the Tigers, this time in Tallahassee, minus Martavis Bryant and Sammy Watkins and Taj Boyd and Rod McDowell and that crew. So Clemson, very talented, ranked 16th in the preseason coaches poll, probably right about where they should be. Florida State will be a substantial favorite in that game and should win somewhat easily, but Clemson, a quality opponent. North Carolina State, Wake, Syracuse, a walk in the park. Notre Dame, the quasi-ACC game that doesn't count in the standings. And, of course, Notre Dame is not in the ACC, but play an ACC schedule of sorts. Then the game at Louisville. Then the two non-division games. So if you listen to our schedule breakdowns here on Mark Rogers TV, you know specifically in the ACC, the Big Ten, and the SEC, it's important who you play out of division because you match up against those teams in your division, and you all play the same schedule within the division. It's who do you play on the other side that could be a huge discrepancy in strength of schedule. For Florida State, it's the game against Virginia, out 2-10 last year, so the Cavs will not most likely put up much of a fight in Tallahassee. And then the game against Miami, this time at Miami Gardens against the Canes. And Florida State, of course, if you can remember back to last October, had the huge matchup, what we thought might be a huge matchup against Miami, and they just obliterated the Canes in that one. So those are the two non-division games, Virginia and Miami, before they finish up in conference play against Boston College in Tallahassee, and then finish up with the Gators. So, wow, that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 home games, but only 4 road games because they've got the neutral site with Oklahoma State at Jerry's Place in Arlington, Texas. So I think it's a pretty good Florida State schedule. Again, it would just be so good for college football if they could go to a formula schedule. I'll explain that at some point. I've explained it in other videos. If they could go to an NFL-type formula schedule, we would see teams like Florida State matching up against teams out of conference that they should match up against. I don't mean beat them down with 4 games against Ohio State, Michigan State, Georgia, and USC, but 2 games like that, at least 1 game like that. We don't have it here. We've got some quality with Oklahoma State, Florida, and Notre Dame out of conference, and then the in-conference matchups with Louisville and Clemson in particular, and also maybe Miami will show up and play and find a quarterback by the time November 15th hits. So Florida State, I believe they're going to run the table. Specifically, the challenge I see, the biggest challenge considering where the game is, I'm going to go with Louisville. I also think Notre Dame, Clemson, and Florida also present about the same level of challenge, where it will be a bit of a stunner if Florida State loses, but not a complete shocker. They're going to lose a football game at some point. May not be this year, could be in the football playoff, where again, we're going to be comparing teams that don't play or don't even play teams that played the other teams we're comparing them against. And that's the travesty of this situation, not being a true playoff, but a selection process. All right, Florida State fans, ACC fans, would love to hear what you have to say about this pretty challenging Florida State Seminole schedule right here on Mark Rogers TV.